Hey there, guys. Alright, today we are back with some more overly sarcastic productions. This time we're going pretty far back in their collection, hitting up history summarized ancient Greece. Whew, this is a really old video. I know Blue has improved a lot. I'm curious how well this one is going to have aged. Because I know I've trended towards not always enjoying Blue's older videos just because of the way his decision in summarizing things wouldn't isn't my choice. Like not my cup of tea. Uh, you know. Uh, so we'll see how this one vibes for me. Um, But before we begin, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love if you join the Discord and follow me over at Twitch. I am playing through Baldur's Gate 3 and having a blast. I have not fucked a bear yet, at least at the time of this recording. That could change by the time this gets uploaded. We will see. I want to fuck a dragon, dude. Anyways, let's dive in.
You know how a bunch of ancient Greek myths make a really big deal out of hubris? When some ancient hero gets too full of himself thinking he's invincible and only realizes that he's not invincible when he's already been impaled and or disintegrated? Well, Athenian history is a grade A example of how hubris can make and break you. So let's get into it. Greek culture in its earliest forms has been around for a good long while, between Minoan Crete and later Mycenaean Greece. In the 400 years after the Bronze Age came crashing down, people had forgotten what writing was, so the Greeks kept themselves busy by telling each other stories out loud about how awesome the Trojan War was. When they finally remembered what writing was in the 700s or 800s, they decided to write it all down. Around the same time, they also remembered how to build big shiny societies. And a bunch of different villages and towns built themselves up and each became what's called a polis. A polis, or city-state, is an autonomous society organized around a city and its neighboring farmland and has its own government. And this government worked by having all the rich adult male landowners get together to vote and decide on
Well done. Well, that's a really great way of summarizing their form of government. Fucking fantastic.
stuff. Aha, you may say. This is because Athens invented democracy, right? To that, I say no, for two reasons. One, Athens had not invented democracy yet, but also two, they're a complete nobody at this point in history. They're like barely a tier 2 polis on the coolest polis list.
Not even, you're barely tier 2, broski. Get out of here. You come back when you're tier 1.
The big boys at this point in time are places like Sparta, Argos, Corinth, and Thebes, not Athens. But while every polis did have
It's what is the most fascinating thing to me about history, because this was only, well, nearly, this was about 2,500, 2,700 years ago. If we're looking at it around the time when, writing was coming back to, or whatever, writing was becoming a big thing in Greece, 700s, blah, blah, blah. 700s BCE. What's crazy to me is just like how, like, Greece is small. Greece is tiny. But back then, like Greece as a state in itself is tiny, but like back then, these four, big deal. Big fucking deal. We don't think of them like that anymore. Like our way of understanding this kind of like way of life, we're so far removed from it. I can't even imagine, like just being like, I guess, so restricted in like, I don't know how to word it, but yeah, it's just so crazy how, and also like how quickly history went from, city states being a thing to then massive, pretty larger governments spanning, like size of Rome and stuff like that. Rome only came by about 500, 600 years after this, or well, started really expanding 500, 600 years after this,
But while every polis did
I don't know if that tangent made any sense.
to have public voting, those systems looked much more like an aristocracy or an oligarchy than a democracy. Democracy didn't come around until about 200 years later when, yes, Athens invented it. And in a Greek context, this means that Athens drastically lowered the property qualifications for citizenship, so a much larger share of the population could vote. But even most Athenians were put off by having so many people involved in the decision-making process, and they expressed it because Athens was notoriously self-critical, especially in the time around the Peloponnesian War. Almost all of the famous Athenian playwrights, and especially the popular satirist playwright Aristophanes, reveled in critiquing Athenian society and addressing important social issues in dramatic and comedic ways. But remember, back to history, at the turn of the
And remember, society can only improve if that society can critique itself. If you are not critiquing yourself, you'll end up like Sparta, dying off, becoming meaningless, nothing.
5th century, Athens is still pretty much irrelevant at this point. Things would change as a result of Persian expansion from, well, Persia into Western Anatolia, where a lot of ethnic Greeks lived. And much like an excellent assortment of ice cream, there are a bunch of different flavors of Greek, but you might be familiar with two: Ionian and Dorian, like the columns. Dorian Greeks mainly lived in the Peloponnese and considered Sparta their quasi-mother city. Ionian Greeks lived in, well, Ionia, aka Western Anatolia, and they viewed Athens as their quasi-mother city. So when Persia did what all empires do and expanded outwards into Anatolia, the Ionians did what subjects do and revolted. The Athenians, being the good mother city they were, went to help. They failed to defeat the Persians, but they succeeded in making them angry, which, now that I think about it, is probably worse. As a result, the Persian king Darius decided, alright, screw those guys, I'm going to sail right over to Athens and deliver a strongly worded letter expressing my disapproval. And to make sure he got the point across, he also sent along his army, which might be the more relevant factor at play here. So Darius sent 25,000 of his most heavily armed mailmen to the coast of Marathon, where the Athenians met them for battle. By all accounts, the Persians should have
The Athenians thickened the sides of the phalanx and spread their center thin, so their line would be exactly as wide as Persia's, expertly avoiding envelopment. The Persians, meanwhile, just had a solid block of dudes, which I guess when you have over 25,000 soldiers, makes sense. Yeah.
Easily beaten the Athenians and gone over to take over Greece, but the Athenians played the waiting game, and when the Persian cavalry was away, probably playing polo, the Athenians attacked, enveloping the Persians and winning the battle. This came as a surprise to the rest of Greece, as next to no one was expecting a dinky little polis like Athens to be able to beat Persia in a fight. So Athenian prestige shot up massively overnight. 7 years later, the Athenian silver mines on the tip of Attica struck it big, and the general Themistocles said, let's use some of that silver money to build a fleet just in case the Persians come back. I have a feeling it'll come in handy. And then the Athenians agreed to build a fleet. Then, 3 short years later, the Persians marched across the Hellespont into Thrace and around to central and southern Greece. Now, Greece had over 200 decent-sized poleis and 500 smaller ones, but only 31 allied to fight against the Persians. 31!
Oh, shit. Okay, he's doing a really good job of summarizing this history right now. Even though it's such an old video. This is like a 6-year-old video. He's doing great.
That is not a lot. Most Greeks were happy to let the Persians come on in and conquer Greece, probably on the basis that it's less exercise than fighting. And some states, like Thebes, went above and beyond to get on the Persians' good side and allied with them. Fun. The Spartans, who led the resistance against Persia because, come on, they're Sparta, used Greece's mountainous geography to their advantage and looked for a narrow place where the Persians' superior numbers wouldn't be able to help them, and that place was Thermopylae, which
What I always forget is how far into Greece Thermopylae is. For whatever reason, I've always pictured Thermopylae to be like all the way up here or fucking all the way over here, you know? Not down here.
literally means the hot gates. And with all those Spartans in one place, I have to say that's a fair assessment. The Spartans fought their hardest, but ultimately lost because of MLG hacks. But while the Spartans were fighting at Thermopylae, Athens and friends were fighting a naval battle against the Persians at Artemisium, just off the coast. This is important because the Greeks needed to stop the Persian navy too. If the army breaks through, that's game over, but if the navy can just sail behind wherever the Spartans are hunkered down, all the phalanxes in the world couldn't save them. That's why it was super important to keep the Persian army and navy separated, because the ancient trireme ships needed to dock regularly to remain in good fighting shape. The battle was ultimately a draw, but that was all they needed. It had bought the Athenians enough time to evacuate their city, which was promptly sacked, and then all head to the Isthmus of Corinth, another Thermopylae-type passage. The Spartan army camped out in the pass and the Athenians took their ships to the island of Salamis. The next battle was it for the Greeks. If either the army or the navy lost, it was all over. Again, the Greeks were saved by a combination of their home turf as well as the Athenians planning years ahead for this exact eventuality. Greek tactics at the Battle of Salamis led to a decisive victory.
Again, great positioning and tactics rendered Persia's superior numbers useless. The battle was a complete loss for Persia.
On the sea, and the entire Persian fleet went on what I'll say was a 2,000-year scuba diving trip, gently, and the bulk of the Persian army retreated. The next summer, Athens and Sparta fought Thebes and Persia in the Battle of Plataea, just north of Attica, and thanks to about a third of the Persian army just straight up bailing for reasons that completely elude me, the Greeks were able to win and kick the Persians out for good. And remember, this was the work of just 31 cities, and even still, most of that legwork was done by Athens and Sparta. It's after this that Athens starts feeling pretty good about themselves, and still congratulating themselves on excellent foresight and planning, decided to create a league of Greek states to fight the Persians in the event that they come back a third time. Recognizing itself as a budding naval power, Athens opted to ride the waves and collect all of the various islands in the Aegean under its wing, or maybe its sail. Not wanting to do all of the work themselves.
Hey friends, what do you say we all pitch into the let's not get Persia stomped a third time fund?
Athens asked that everyone pay into a collective defense fund with either ships or money. The money was kept on the sacred island of Delos, hence its name, the Delian League. This started out all nice and good, but Athens started to feel a little too good about itself and kept stretching its arms across Greece, roping in more allies and treating them increasingly harshly, forcing them to pay higher tributes, establishing democracies by force, and confiscating large amounts of allied land. Oh, and
USA?
And did I mention that they used the treasury money to fund the construction of shiny temple buildings that offered zero strategic benefit in the event of a Persian invasion?
USA.
Oh, and also that they moved the treasury money into those fancy buildings that they spent the treasury money on? Yeah.
USA.
Because they did that. Also, did I forget that they maybe might have quietly struck a deal with Persia to get them not to invade anymore, invalidating the entire point of the whole empire? I mean, alliance. Why did I say that? Silly me. So yeah, this was pretty great for Athens and its Athenian empire, but pretty crap if you were anyone else. Meanwhile, Sparta was totally minding its own business, honestly not caring at all about Athens' imperialistic shenaniganery, up until the precise moment that Athens allied with Argos, one of Sparta's oldest enemies. That got them a little bit annoyed, and by little I mean very much. So Athens and Sparta entered into a 15
There were two Peloponnesian Wars. The first one was 460 to 445, and the second one, the big fancy famous one, was 431 to 404. The first happened because of the Argos alliance. The second one happened for a bunch of similar reasons. What's crazy to me is just how long wars lasted in these time periods, right? From 431 to 404. I mean, like, modern wars don't last this long when the fighting is, like, all out. You know, like, technically the U.S. had been in Afghanistan for 20 years or so, or almost 20 years maybe. I don't know if we quite reached the 20 year before we pulled out. Can't remember the timeline. But like in terms of how like involved the economy was, I feel like those 20 years are not at all comparable to the way Greek city-state economy would have been involved in these like nearly 30-year wars.
Year Cold War of sorts, after which they made a 30-year peace treaty that lasted only 15 years. Again, this war didn't happen because Athens was acting like an evil empire, but they totally were, on several counts. Sparta didn't care about that. It was that Athens was butting into Sparta's sphere of influence by aggravating Sparta and her allies in several ways. At this point, Athens had gone mad and war was inevitable. The problem was that, unlike in the Persian War, each city had no intention of directly attacking the other. Sparta was protected by how far into the Peloponnese it was, and Athens, though somewhat exposed, had built long walls to the Piraeus harbor, ensuring its maritime supply chain couldn't possibly be broken. So each side pursued a different strategy. Sparta wanted to draw Athens out into an open battle and crush them, being the kick-ass Spartan soldiers that they were. Athens, meanwhile, had no intention of fighting Sparta at all, and was content to wait until the Spartans got bored and ended the war. The difficulty for this strategy was that Sparta was really smart, and every summer they went out to Attica and destroyed a bunch of farmland around the coast in plain view of the city, hoping to bait Athens into a fight. Athens, I've got to give it to them, held really strong. They watched farms that their families had worked for decades and generations get completely destroyed, but they still didn't fight. Instead, a lot of fighting took place on the periphery, as both sides would poke and prod at each other's allies. There were a lot of small battles in the first phase of the war, but I'll mention 3 in some detail because they're important, as well as being good stories. First is the multi-year-long Theban siege of Plataea, otherwise known as the Ninja Ramp War. So in 431, Thebes decided to go stomp on innocent little Athenian allied Plataea, and the story is a little ridiculous, so bear with me. First, the Thebans send in 300 ninjas, yes, basically ninjas, into the city after dark, tasked with bringing Plataea into a Theban alliance, by force if necessary. The ninjas were ultimately discovered and the entire town erupted into a hilarious melee with those Theban ninjas, killing them all. Then, Thebes attempted to siege the city outright, and built an earthen mound, or a dirt ramp, over the walls. So the Plataeans cut a hole in their wall and dug out the dirt. So the Thebans threw on more dirt, and then the Plataeans dug out the dirt from under the ramp.
Oh, I've heard this one. Yeah, it's fucking funny.
Then the Thebans threw on even more dirt, and then the Plataeans built a second wall inside the original wall, and eventually the Thebans said, alright, screw this, and brought over Sparta, and the two of them built a moat around the town in an attempt to starve it into submission. Plataea ultimately appealed to history, arguing that Thebes was evil for siding with the Persians at the Battle of, remember, Plataea, at the end of the Second Persian War. Sparta's harsh pragmatism then took over, and they asked the Plataeans, well okay, but what have you done for us in this war? To which the Plataeans had no answer, and in short order the city was razed to the ground after 4 long years of fighting.
Damn.
Now that is cold. If you thought Sparta was the good guy in this war, you are unfortunately mistaken. If you also thought that Sparta was any good at sailing, you are quite sorely mistaken there as well. The battles of Now Pactus both illustrate how the Spartans, despite far superior numbers, are complete crap at naval warfare. In the first battle, the Spartans adopted a ridiculous formation and the Athenians beat them. And in the second battle, an Athenian ship pulled off what amounts to a trick shot, and the Spartan rowers all dropped their oars in shock, allowing the Athenians to beat them in the ensuing confusion. Thankfully, history makes at least this one easy for us. Spartans are pretty much only good on land, and Athenians are pretty much only good at sea. Partially explains why the war was so damn long. And finally, in 425, a series of basically accidents led to Athens winning a strategically important battle on Spartan soil. So some Athenians were tooling around on the west coast of Peloponnese on their way to do something else, and a storm forced them to stop. The general Demosthenes, who also later appears in the Sicilian expedition, insisted on docking and encamping at Pylos. Sparta, panicking, sent soldiers and ships to the Bay of Pylos in an attempt to kick them out. Athens won the naval battle, obviously, and the Spartans on land retreated. Except for the poor sods who happens to be stationed on this island over here and had no way of escaping. The Athenians shot arrows at the defenseless Spartans and famously took 120 of them as live captives. This had a strategic effect on the war too, as it gave Athens the leverage to stop Sparta from running up to Attica every year to wreck their farmland, which was really helpful. Sparta, recognizing their moment of weakness here, offered peace. Athens, of course, refused on the basis of, no, we want more stuff. So much for peace. A few years later, Sparta wised up and attacked Athens where it mattered most, their navy. They headed up to the northern city of Amphipolis, which was Athens' link to their supply of timber and silver, both of which were essential to shipbuilding. Athens tried to get it back, but they failed, so they reluctantly agreed to a 50-year peace treaty. Okay, take a guess. How many years do you think this 50-year peace deal is going to last?
2.
This is so stupid. 3 years!
I was close! Let's go!
3! Not even kidding! This was because Athens allied with Argos. Again. And Sparta got real angry about it. Again. And this time they won a resulting battle. So, again, so much for that peace, huh? Psst. Hey Athens, do us a favor and recognize when to stop. Then, 3 short years later, Athens launched its wonderfully disastrous Sicilian expedition, which I discuss at length in this video about my all-time favorite historical troublemaker, Alcibiades. It also covers most of the rest of the war, so I'm gonna fast forward through that for the sake of time. In 405, Persia, of all people, allied with Sparta because they were probably getting annoyed and a little uncomfortable by how much Athens was putzing about so close to Persian territory. So they gave the Spartans tons of money and tons of ships, which allowed them to seal the deal and end the war in very short order. After the war, Athens remained a cultural and academic center in Greece, but politically and militarily they never regained their relevance. And given they've been coasting off of the Parthenon for a good 2,500 years, I think they came out of the 5th century alright. Following the war, the brother of the Persian king led 10,000 Greek mercenaries and soldiers into the heartland of Persia, and when that guy died, those 10,000 Greeks needed to book it out of Persia or die, and they escaped, amazingly. That story, told much better by the Athenian historian Xenophon than it is by me, is called the Anabasis, or the March Up Country, and it's a genuinely unbelievable survival story. After this, Greek history takes a 60-year breather before Alexander the Late shows up, but if you want to know what ridiculous shenanigans happened in the meantime, then give a look to this video on Thebes. For now, that's pretty much Athenian history for you. Basically, they were nothing until they were everything, and their hubris, for all of the shiny temples it gave them, was the ultimate source of their downfall.
And that was History Summarized Ancient Greece. This was really well done, actually. I was not expecting such an old video from Blue to be, there was nuance here. It didn't feel rushed. I enjoyed the pacing. It was a little slow in parts. Blue is not a fast talker like Red, and so I think I trend towards liking Red's pace a bit more. But yeah, this was really well done, I think. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.